I woke up 10 minutes before the alarm clock rang, as usual. 75 years on this earth had taught me precision better than any Swiss watch. Aristo was already standing by the bed, his long muzzle with dark, intelligent eyes just a few centimeters from my face. He didn't whimper or jump like young dogs do. My boy was an aristocrat to the tips of his claws. He just stood and watched, knowing I understood him without words. "Good morning, my friend," I murmured, reaching out to cup his dainty head. In another corner of the room, curled up on her pillow, slept Gertrude, my other greyhound. She was a little older than Aristo and preferred to lie down longer. In that, she and I were alike. Or rather, we used to be. Age and loneliness had turned me into a lark. I got out of bed slowly, feeling my knees crunch. The gout was making itself known again, but it was bearable. I'd had worse. I threw on an old plaid robe and waddled into the kitchen. The little house on the outskirts of Bowers where I'd lived for the past 5 years was far from luxurious, but I loved it. No extra rooms, no spaces filled with emptiness and silence. Just the essentials: a bedroom, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen, and a small backyard for the dogs. Pouring water into the kettle, I looked at the calendar. May 23rd, Thursday. The day Eleanor left me for good, 8 years ago. I don't know why I still mark these dates. The doctor said that memory fades with age, but mine, as luck would have it, remained crystal clear, especially about loss. "Ellie," I whispered, looking at the picture on the kitchen table. "If you could see what our family had become." She was smiling at me from a picture taken on our 40-year anniversary. It was the last holiday we celebrated together. 3 months later, she was diagnosed with cancer, and another 6 months later, I was alone. Well, not really alone. I had Nathan, our only son, our pride and joy. The kettle boiled, snapping me out of my memories. I brewed a strong black tea, another habit Dr. Burgess had advised me to give up. "At your age, Mr. Pemberton, you'd better switch to herbal teas," he said, with that condescending smile one saves for old people and small children. Doc didn't realize that that cup of strong tea in the morning was one of the few pleasures left in my life. Like my dogs, like Eleanor's picture. Speaking of dogs. Gertrude entered the kitchen at the sound of the kettle. Unlike the energetic Aristo, she moved with the grace of an aging ballerina, slowly but with dignity. "Are you awake, princess?" I smiled, leaning over to stroke her head. "Let's have breakfast now." Breakfast for the three of us was simple but nutritious. For me, oatmeal with a bit of butter and a handful of blueberries. For the dogs, premium dry food mixed with a little canned meat. People are often surprised to learn how much I spend on feeding my greyhounds. Strange priorities for a retiree, they say. They don't realize that Aristo and Gertrude are the last creatures on this earth who look at me with genuine love. After breakfast, it was time for our morning walk. I threw on an old tweed jacket, another habit Nathan teased me about. "Dad, you look like a professor from an old British movie," he'd say with the same condescending smile as Dr. Burgess. Maybe that's why I kept wearing it. Bowers was the perfect place for a leisurely stroll. A small town where everyone knew each other, where there was none of the hustle and bustle of big cities. I had chosen it for a reason after Eleanor's death. No one here looked at me with pity, like old friends in Riverdale, where we had lived most of our lives. Here I was just that strange old man with the expensive dogs. Aristo, Gertrude, and I walked slowly through the quiet streets, enjoying the morning chill. The greyhounds, despite their reputation for speed, had adapted well to my leisurely pace. Sometimes I let them run in the fenced-in area of the local park, and then you could see their true nature. Swift as the wind, they seemed to fly over the ground. "Good morning, Mr. Pemberton." Wesley Crump, owner of the only bakery in town, called out to me. The usual cinnamon bun. "Morning, Wesley. Yeah, I guess so." I nodded, stopping in front of his little store. It was another ritual, a cinnamon bun from Crump's every Thursday. A small thing, but it gave structure to my days, filled them with little joys. "How's your son doing? Still making big money in town?" Wesley asked, handing me a paper bag of warm pastries. "I guess so," I answered evasively. "Nathan's doing well." Wesley nodded, but I could see the understanding in his eyes. Probably because his own son had left for California 5 years ago and hadn't called since. As I drove back home, I reflected on Nathan. My son, once a sweet boy with perpetually scraped knees, is now a successful financial analyst. 38 years old, beautiful wife, 2 kids, a house in the upscale Bowers Hills neighborhood, the American dream in the flesh. Except there was hardly any room for me in that dream. When Eleanor died, Nathan was there for me, supported me, helped with funeral arrangements, even offered to move in with them. But then Delilah came along, beautiful as a picture, with flawless blonde hair and a smile that didn't affect her eyes. A former model, as she liked to emphasize, though her career had been limited to a few photo shoots for local boutiques. Things had changed with Delilah's arrival. Nathan started calling less often. His visits turned into short, awkward meetings. And then they decided to buy a house in Bowers Hills, a house they couldn't afford. "Dad, it's an investment in the future," Nathan urged me. "In 10 years it will be worth twice as much. But we need help with the down payment and the monthly payments, just for a few years until I get a promotion." And I agreed. Gave most of my savings to the down payment and took on 2/3 of the monthly mortgage payment. That meant I had to sell Eleanor and I and move into this little place on the outskirts of town. "It's temporary, Dad," Nathan promised. "As soon as I'm back on my feet, we'll pay you back." That was 5 years ago. Since then, Nathan had gotten 2 promotions and Delilah had a collection of designer handbags. But somehow, the talk of a refund had faded into oblivion. When I got home, I found a blinking light on my answering machine. In the age of smartphones, I remained faithful to the old landline phone with an answering machine, another one of old man Pemberton's oddities. "Dad, it's Nathan," came my son's voice from the speaker. "I need a reminder about the family dinner tonight. Delilah's making your favorite lasagna. We'll expect you at 7 o'clock. Dad, please don't bring the dogs this time. Penelope has allergies, you remember. Penelope wasn't allergic. Delilah just didn't want those animals leaving hair on her designer furniture, but I stopped arguing a long time ago." The rest of the day passed with the usual chores. I did a little work in the garden, read an old Agatha Christie detective novel, took a nap in a chair. At 6:30, I started to get ready for dinner. I took a shower, chose my only decent suit, dark blue, slightly worn at the elbows. I combed my thinning gray hair and spritzed on the cologne Eleanor had given me for our last birthday together. "I'll be back soon," I said to the dogs, stroking their heads. "Be good girls." Aristo looked at me with an expression I interpreted as, "Why are you going there if they make you miserable?" Smart dog. Sometimes I thought he understood me better than my own son. The ride to Bowers Hills took 20 minutes in my old Ford. The neighborhood where Nathan lived was strikingly different from my part of the city. Wide streets, immaculately mowed lawns, houses that each looked like the cover of an interior design magazine. As I pulled up to my son's house, I noticed 2 other cars in the driveway besides Nathan's and Delilah's. Guests? Nathan hadn't said anything about guests. I felt a prick of irritation, but quickly suppressed it. After all, it's their house, even if I'm paying most of the mortgage. I parked on the street and walked slowly to the front door, mentally preparing myself for another evening of pretense and awkward pauses. Ringing the doorbell, I heard footsteps approaching. Delilah opened the door. Impeccable as always, blonde hair styled in waves, makeup like a magazine cover, a dress that emphasized all the advantages of her figure. "Harrison!" she exclaimed with feigned enthusiasm. We were beginning to worry. Come on in, everyone's here. I nodded silently and stepped through the threshold, ready for the next challenge. Nathan and Delilah's house was exactly as they'd painted it in the glossy magazines about the life of the successful. A three-story neo-colonial mansion with columns at the entrance and an impeccably manicured lawn. 1,500 square feet of space with only 4 people living in it. Only their living room could fit in my small house. The hallway greeted me with the dazzling whiteness of the marble floor and a crystal chandelier that I knew was worth more than my Ford. I carefully wiped my feet on the mat by the door, though I was sure my old shoes were clean enough. Dad, finally. Nathan appeared from the back of the house, a glass of something amber in his hand. We thought you weren't coming. He hugged me quickly, formally, patting me on the back the way strangers do. I told you I'd come, I replied. There was a note of irritation in my voice that I didn't have time to hide. Sure. Nathan was already pulling me into the living room. We have Bradley and Jenna Caulfield tonight. Remember them? My colleagues from Sterling Investments. I didn't. So many important people had passed through their house over the years that I'd stopped remembering names and faces. The living room looked like the set for a movie about the rich and successful. Huge floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured garden, cream-colored sofas arranged around a glass coffee table, an abstract painting on the wall. I knew it cost $90,000 because Delilah mentioned that figure every chance she got. The couple sitting on the couch, obviously the Caulfields, looked like clones of my son and daughter-in-law. He in an expensive needlepoint suit, she with perfect styling and a smile that didn't affect her eyes. Here comes the legendary Meister Pemberton Sr., exclaimed the man, rising to meet me. We've heard. I doubted Nathan had told his co-workers much about me, but I politely shook his outstretched hand. This is Bradley and Jenna, Nathan introduced them. Bradley had recently made junior partner. That explained why Nathan was making such a fuss. Career games. I nodded and sat in the chair by the window, the only place that was tacitly considered mine in this house. Where are the kids? I asked, noticing the absence of the grandchildren. Oliver and Penelope are upstairs, Delilah said, entering the room with a tray of canapés. I hired a babysitter for them for the evening. The kids are bored at adult conversations. In fact, it was the first time in a month I'd been able to see the grandchildren, but Delilah apparently decided otherwise. Why don't I go upstairs and say hello? I suggested. You don't want to disturb them. Delilah cut her off with a smile that was meant to soften the emphatic rejection. They've just finished their lessons. You know how much competition there is for places in good schools these days. Every grade counts. Oliver was 11, Penelope was 9. But Delilah treated their education with the fanaticism of a general planning a military operation. Private school, tutors in 3 subjects, piano lessons, horseback riding, and tennis. They just didn't have a childhood as I know it. Let's drink to Bradley's success, Nathan declared, pouring wine into glasses. Dad, do you want a regular whiskey? I nodded. Another little ritual, whiskey for an old man who doesn't know about good wines, as Delilah had once remarked. The conversation flowed around markets, investments, some corporate mergers. I sipped my whiskey silently, not trying to take in the details. I'd been a good engineer in my day, but finance had always been a dark forest for me. That's why I'd trusted Nathan to manage my savings when he was just starting out as a financier. Another decision I regretted. What did you do before you retired, Mr. Pemberton? Jenna Caulfield suddenly asked, seemingly out of politeness to engage me in conversation. I was a civil engineer, I answered. I designed bridges. Oh, how interesting, she exclaimed with that false interest which is worse than outright indifference. It must have been fascinating. My last project, the Sutton Bridge over the Clark River, is still standing. 42 years without a single structural problem. Dad likes to tout his accomplishments, Nathan said with a nervous chuckle. You have to admit, things are done very differently now. Computer modeling, new materials. The principles are the same, I argued. Good engineering never gets old. Neither does good wine. Bradley picked up on this, apparently sensing the tension. By the way, Nathan, this Chateau Margaux is excellent. 97th year? 2000, Nathan answered proudly. Delilah and I brought back a few bottles from our last trip to France. I thought about the fact that the trip to France had probably been paid for out of the money that was supposed to pay off the mortgage too, but I kept silent, not in front of guests. Delilah appeared from the kitchen, announcing that dinner was ready. We moved into the dining room, another space demonstrating the wealth of the owners. A solid oak table, an antique sideboard, silver candelabras. It all looked like it had been rented from a museum. Delilah made the lasagna herself, Nathan said proudly when we were seated. I couldn't help but smile skeptically. Cooked it herself, in Delilah's vocabulary, meant instructed the housekeeper. But then again, not in front of guests. Harrison, you were in Italy, weren't you? During the war? Delilah asked, arranging the lasagna on the plates. After the war, I corrected. 52nd. I was in the engineers helping rebuild the infrastructure. How patriotic, she nodded with the same fake smile. You know, my grandfather fought in the war too. Korea, I think. Or Vietnam. I don't remember exactly. The difference between Korea and Vietnam was about 20 years, but I didn't bother pointing that out. Historical accuracy was clearly not high on Delilah's list of priorities. Anyway, that's all in the past, she continued. It's a different world now, isn't it? Technology, globalization. Sometimes I think it must be hard for the older generation to keep up with all these changes. Here it is. The first hint of my backwardness. Every generation has its own challenges, I replied with restraint. But the basic principles remain the same. Honesty, responsibility, caring for loved ones. Of course, Delilah interrupted. No one argues with eternal values. It's just that the world is moving so fast these days. For example, our Oliver is already creating some programs on the computer and he's only 11. Can you imagine? Impressive, I agreed. Although in my generation, kids his age already knew how to fix radios and assemble simple electrical circuits. Well, that was more out of necessity, wasn't it? Delilah smiled indulgently. Not that you had a choice, unlike the kids of today. I felt myself boiling but held back. It was another of Delilah's attacks, a seemingly innocent remark, but with the clear implication that your time had passed. Speaking of children, Nathan interjected, sensing my mood. Bradley, your son is at St. Thomas Academy, isn't he? How is he doing? The conversation shifted away from my outdated experience to a discussion of elite schools, extracurriculars, and Ivy League prospects. I silently ate the lasagna, which I had to admit was quite good. Apparently the housekeeper had really tried. After the main course, Delilah served dessert, a French cake with a name I couldn't pronounce. The conversation, meanwhile, turned to plans for the summer. Jenna and I are thinking about Hawaii, Bradley reported. We bought a timeshare in Maui last year. Great investment, by the way. Oh, we love Maui, Delilah exclaimed. I think we're going to Europe this year, though. Penelope has been raving about Paris since she saw Emily in Paris. The girl is 9 years old. I couldn't help myself. Isn't Disneyland more interesting at that age? There was an awkward pause in the room. Dad, Nathan said with a strained smile, Penelope is very advanced for her age. She's already developing excellent taste. Yes, Harrison, Delilah said. The children of today are not like the children of your time. They're developing much faster. They're more self-aware. Psychologists say it's the result of information accessibility. I wanted to argue that it's more useful for a 9-year-old to run through puddles and climb trees than to talk about Parisian fashion. But again, I kept silent. It's useless. Speaking of development, Delilah continued, have you heard about the new program at the academy? They're introducing Mandarin Chinese from first grade. Can you believe it? They say it's the future of China, so our kids will be well equipped. Maybe. I nodded, although in my time it was thought that first you should master your native language and learn to think clearly, and then you should take up foreign languages. Things were different in your time, Harrison. Delilah smiled sweetly. The world has changed. It's all about multitasking, adaptability, staying ahead of the competition. If a kid doesn't speak at least 2 languages by the time he's 12, he's already behind. Lagging behind who? I couldn't take it anymore. From the same driven children who don't have time to be children? Dad, Nathan began warningly. No, Nathan, let your father speak, Delilah interrupted with a smile that didn't bode well. It's always interesting to hear the opinions of the more traditional generation. Traditional. Another euphemism for outdated. I just think, I said, trying to speak calmly, that childhood is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and it would be good to let children live it to the fullest, not to turn it into endless preparation for admission to a prestigious university. That's sweet, Delilah purred. Such a romanticized view of parenting. Unfortunately, it's not very applicable in today's competitive world. If we want our children to succeed, what does succeed mean to you? I asked. Lots of money? A prestigious job? A house like this one? For example, Delilah nodded. What's wrong with that? Didn't you want a better life for Nathan? I wanted him to be happy, I answered. That's not always the same thing. Dad's insinuating that I'm not happy, Nathan laughed nervously, turning to the Caulfields. Can you imagine? A man who has worked his whole life from call to call is trying to convince me that money doesn't bring happiness. I didn't say money doesn't bring happiness. I was just suggesting that chasing it can take too much. But Nathan, as always, only heard what he wanted to hear. Your father is just concerned about you, Bradley Caulfield said diplomatically. It's natural. Oh, we know, Delilah nodded. Harrison is always very caring, sometimes too much. She emphasized the last word so that there was no doubt that, in her eyes, my caring was more of a hindrance than a help. The rest of the dinner was relatively peaceful. There was talk of travel, of a new restaurant in downtown Bowers, of an upcoming fundraiser at the country club. I was mostly silent, inserting remarks only when I was addressed directly. After dessert, the Caulfields began to pack up to go home. Jenna said something about the babysitter not being able to stay late. Delilah walked them to the door with promises of seeing them soon and having a weekend together. When the door closed behind the guests, the atmosphere in the house instantly changed. Delilah turned to me, and her smile became noticeably colder. Was it necessary to make a scene about parenting? She asked. Bradley and Jenna must have thought you were judging them too. I wasn't judging anyone, I countered. I was just stating my opinion. Which no one asked for, Delilah cut me off. Seriously, Harrison, sometimes it's better to just smile and nod, especially when it comes to the people your son's career depends on. Delilah, Nathan began conciliatorily, Dad just... No, let him speak, Delilah interrupted him. I want to hear what else we are doing wrong in the eyes of the great sage Harrison Pemberton. I took a deep breath, holding back my irritation. This was exactly what she was trying to do, to provoke me into conflict so she could accuse me of disrespect. I think I'll go home, I said, rising. Thanks for dinner. But you didn't even get to see the kids, Nathan protested. Some other time, I said. Since they had such a busy schedule, I didn't want to intrude. Delilah let out a short laugh, which I chose to ignore. Nathan walked me to the door looking embarrassed and a little guilty. Dad, you do realize that Delilah is she's just very ambitious about the kids, he said quietly. She wants the best for them. Like we all do, I nodded. It's just a question of what's best. Nathan shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, clearly not knowing what to say. Okay, son, never mind, I patted him on the shoulder. I'll see you next week. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. For some reason, I remembered my father's words to me years ago. Son, wealth is not something you have. It's what you can do without. As I looked at the huge house that glowed with lights through the twilight, I thought to myself that my son and his family never seemed to have internalized this simple truth. The next visit to my son's house was 2 weeks later. This time the occasion was a family meeting about summer vacation. Nathan called me Thursday morning, his voice sounding strangely enthusiastic. Dad, we're having a little meeting about summer vacation on Saturday. Be there by 3. Delilah wants everyone to speak up. That last sentence made me chuckle. Delilah and everyone has their say are mutually exclusive. Usually she just announced her decisions, waiting for approval and admiration. But I'd agreed to come. Perhaps it was a chance to spend some time with my grandchildren, whom I was seeing less and less often. On Saturday, the weather was remarkably pleasant. Light breeze, sunshine, not a cloud in the sky. A perfect day for a walk with the dogs. Aristo and Gertrude clearly shared my opinion, reluctantly returning home after their morning walk. I'll be back soon, I promised them, scratching behind their ears. And then maybe we'll go for another walk. The greyhounds looked at me doubtfully. They knew as well as I did that visits to Nathan's were rarely short and rarely ended in a good mood. On the way to Bowers Hills, I pondered what might be a good option for a family vacation. An unexpected idea came to mind. Crystal Lake, where Nathan, Eleanor, and I spent a few summer vacations when my son was about 9 or 10 years old. We rented a small shore house there, fished, swam, and roasted marshmallows by the fire. Nathan loved those trips. I wonder if he remembers. I parked in front of my son's house at 3 o'clock sharp. Nathan opened the door, which was rare. Usually the housekeeper or Delilah did it. Dad, I'm glad you could make it. He hugged me again with the same formal embrace I was used to receiving. You know I'm always happy to see you, I replied, as I made my way into the house. Everyone was already gathered in the living room. Delilah was sitting in a chair like a throne, flipping through some glossy magazine. Oliver was frowning, sitting on the couch, staring at a clipboard. Penelope was on the floor, drawing something in a sketchbook. "Grandpa!" Penelope exclaimed, jumping up and rushing over to me. She was the only one who still showed genuine joy at my appearance. My little princess. I picked her up in my arms, feeling my back ache. She wasn't as small as she used to be. "Penelope, be careful," Delilah intervened. "It's hard for Grandpa to lift you." I ignored the remark, hugging my granddaughter tighter. "What are you drawing?" I asked as she returned to her sketchbook. "Disneyland Paris," Penelope replied. "Mommy says we're going there this summer." I glanced at Delilah, who continued to flip through the magazine with an innocent look. So the decision had already been made. The family meeting was just another sham. "Dad, have a seat." Nathan pointed to the chair by the window, the seat that was mine. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Whiskey?" "Water, please," I answered, not wanting to dull my senses. I felt like I was going to need all the mental clarity I could get today. Oliver barely looked up from his clipboard when I said hello. He was at that difficult age when rebelling against everything adult becomes a major occupation. "What's new at school, Oliver?" I tried to make conversation. "Nothing," he mumbled, not looking away from the screen. "Oliver got a perfect score in science," Delilah interjected proudly. "His project on renewable energy was recognized as the best in the school." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That's quite an accomplishment." Grandma helped, Oliver said suddenly, referring to Delilah's mother. She found me a tutor. Your grandfather could help too, I said. I'm an engineer, after all. Was an engineer, Delilah corrected. Technology has changed a lot since then, Harrison. I felt a twinge of irritation, but held back. Nathan returned with a glass of water for me and apparently decided to get down to business. So, we're here to discuss our plans for summer vacation, he began, sitting down next to Delilah. We all have 2 weeks in August and we need to figure out how to make the most of them. And enjoy it, I added. It's a vacation, after all. Of course, Delilah nodded with that condescending smile I hated so much. That's why I suggest Europe, France, Italy, maybe Switzerland. Cultural enrichment and vacation in one. Sounds expensive, I remarked. Quality vacations can't be cheap, Delilah countered. Besides, it's an investment in the children's development. Language practice, exposure to cultural heritage. What do the kids think? I asked, turning to the grandchildren. Penelope, Oliver, what do you want? Penelope, without breaking away from the drawing, repeated, I want to Disneyland Paris, and to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa. I doubted that the Louvre was Penelope's idea, but I didn't say anything. What about you, Oliver? The teenager shrugged. I don't care, as long as I have good Wi-Fi. Delilah let out a victorious laugh. See? The kids are totally on board with the Europe idea. I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. Something told me that Nathan had called me in for a reason, that something was expected of me. And I was beginning to guess what it was. I have another suggestion, I said. Crystal Lake. Remember, Nathan, we went there when you were about 10 years old. Something flashed across my son's face. Surprise? Recognition? But it was quickly replaced by a neutral expression. Vaguely, he answered. I think there were some houses on the shore? Exactly, I nodded enthusiastically. We rented one of them for 2 weeks. We fished, swam, hiked in the woods. You caught your first base then, remember? You were so proud that you wouldn't let us cook it, insisted on letting it go back into the lake. Nathan smiled weakly, apparently remembering something. Yes, I think there was something like that. We could rent the same cabin, I continued, or even buy it if you like it. It would be a great place for a family vacation. Fresh air, nature, no hustle and bustle. The kids could learn to fish, make a fire. Delilah looked at me as if I'd suggested a vacation in the sewers. Harrison, she said with undisguised disgust, are you seriously suggesting that we spend 2 weeks in some cabin in the woods, with no amenities, with mosquitoes and other insects? There are quite modern cabins there, I objected, with electricity, running water and everything you need, and fresh air and communion with nature will do the children good. They'll benefit from learning about world culture, Delilah said. Not digging in the ground and killing fish. Fishing isn't murder. I was beginning to lose patience. It's an ancient art of foraging for food that teaches patience, observation, and respect for nature. By the way, we let most of the fish back. How exciting, Delilah said. Catch, torture, and release. It's a great lesson for kids. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Look, Delilah, I'm just offering an alternative, an option that would allow the family to bond, to spend time together without the distractions of smartphones, tablets, and other gadgets. An option that is also much cheaper than traveling to Europe. Delilah looked at Nathan triumphantly. It's all about money, isn't it, Harrison? It's about using resources wisely, I countered. It's about what's valuable to the family. And what do you think is valuable? Delilah asked with a challenge. Living like it's the last century, giving up the opportunities of the modern world? What's valuable is the time we spend together, I answered. Talking around the campfire, fishing together, swimming in the lake. All of these things create memories that will stay with the children for a lifetime. Like going to the Louvre or the Colosseum, Delilah said. The difference is that they are truly meaningful cultural experiences, not dubious entertainment like torturing fish. I looked at Nathan, expecting encouragement, but he avoided my gaze. He always did. Nathan, I addressed him directly, you remember how good we had it at the lake. Don't you want to give your children the same memories? My son squirmed uncomfortably in his chair. Dad, times have changed. Kids are different now. They need different experiences. They're children, I argued. They need childhood, real childhood with games, adventures, discoveries, not endless excursions to museums and cathedrals that don't interest them. Don't speak for my children, Delilah interjected. You have no idea what they're interested in and what they're not. You see them once a month, if not less. That was a low blow. I saw my grandchildren infrequently through no fault of my own. Delilah was always finding excuses to cancel or shorten our visits. Whose fault is that? I asked quietly. Harrison, let's not do this. Delilah rolled her eyes dramatically. We were getting off topic. Well, I've already booked a hotel in Paris and a villa on the coast of Italy. All we have to do is decide how many days we're going to spend in each place. Already booked? I questioned. Then why all this farce with the family council? It's not a farce, Delilah said indignantly. We're actually discussing the details, and it would be nice if you contributed to the trip since you care so much about family values. That's it. That's why they called me. They wanted me to pay for part of their European tour. So it's still about money. I felt the anger building inside me. Not on my part, but on yours. Delilah gave me a look of hurt innocence. I don't know what you mean. We just wanted to include you in the family plans, but if you're not interested. I'm interested in my grandchildren getting a real vacation, not another round of cultural enrichment, I argued. And I'm more than interested in knowing where my money is going. Dad, Nathan interjected, no one's asking you for money. We just thought it would be nice for you to be a part of the family vacation. Financially, you mean? I clarified. Because my offer to spend a vacation at the lake was rejected without discussion. Because it's a ridiculous offer, Delilah said. Seriously, Harrison, do you really think today's kids are going to be interested in fishing and campfires? That's a bygone age. There's a different standard of recreation now. Different standards or different price tags? I asked you directly. What if it's both? Delilah was clearly beginning to lose patience. Yes, a quality vacation costs money. And yes, it involves more than sitting on the shore of a lake with a fishing rod. I think we're getting carried away, Nathan intervened. Let's just admit that everyone has different ideas about the ideal vacation and accept the decision that has already been made, I finished for him. Europe, hotels, excursions, and the bill, which you're hoping I'll foot some of the bill. Well, now that you're talking about money, Delilah straightened in her chair. Yes, it would be nice if you'd support this trip. After all, it's for your grandchildren, too. My grandchildren would be just as happy at the lake, I objected, and it would have cost everyone a lot less. God, Harrison, you're obsessed with saving money, Delilah exclaimed with annoyance. No one expected you to pay for the whole trip, maybe the flight or part of the lodging. I'm already paying 2/3 of your mortgage, I reminded her. The mortgage on the house you live in, not me. There was a heavy silence in the room. The kids looked tensely from me to their parents and back again. Nathan looked as if he suddenly couldn't breathe. This is different, Delilah finally said icily. And you shouldn't mention it in front of the children. Why not? I asked. Isn't it good for them to know how the real world works? That houses don't magically appear, that you have to pay for them? Daddy, please, Nathan began, but Delilah interrupted him. No, let him finish. Her eyes narrowed. I want to hear where he's going with this. My point is that the opinion of the man who pays for most of the roof over your head might carry some weight in family decisions, I said bluntly. Instead of dismissing his suggestions as ridiculous, and outdated. Delilah looked at me as if I were an insect suddenly speaking in a human voice. Then her face contorted into a smile that didn't bode well. "Oh, that's it," she said. "Money gives you the right to vote, right? Buying influence? Like in business?" "No," I argued. "But they deserve at least some basic respect." "Respect?" Delilah laughed, but there was no mirth in her laugh. "Harrison, let me get this straight. You really think that by putting money down on a mortgage, money you offered to put down, mind you, you're buying the right to tell us how to raise our kids and where to vacation?" "I'm not telling you," I began, feeling myself boiling over. "I'm offering an alternative." "An alternative that no one cares about," Delilah cut me off. "Not me, not Nathan, not the kids. And you know what? You're too poor to have a say in this." "Delilah," Nathan exclaimed, but she paid him no attention. "Yes, yes, I said it," she continued, looking me straight in the eye. "You can pay the entire mortgage, but that's not enough to dictate how we live. I'll decide what to do, because I'm the lady of the house." I felt something inside me snap, not anger, something deeper, more fundamental. It was as if the last thread that bound me to this family had thinned to the point of breaking. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling the stares of everyone in the room. Without a word, I headed for the exit. Nathan's voice sounded behind me. "Dad, wait! She didn't mean that." I didn't listen, but I didn't listen. I left the house, got into my car, and drove away, feeling strangely calm, as if I had made an important decision that I had put off for too long. The next morning, I called the bank and canceled all automatic mortgage payments on Nathan and Delilah's house. After calling the bank, I experienced a strange feeling, a mixture of guilt, anxiety, and relief, like I'd lifted a heavy weight off my shoulders that I'd been dragging around for years without noticing it was bending me to the ground. When I returned home, I found myself breathing more deeply, moving more freely. Aristo and Gertrude, sensitive to my mood, circled around with curiosity, as if they saw a new person in front of them. "We are starting a new life, my friends," I told them, bending down to scratch behind their ears. "A life where we are respected or left alone." The next step was a visit to another bank. I opened a new account and transferred all of my remaining savings there, except for the amount needed for everyday expenses. Nathan had access to my main account, just in case, as he said when he suggested it years ago. Not once after that did we discuss whether he used that access. I preferred not to know, but now I wanted to be sure that every cent of my money was controlled only by me. The bank teller, a young man named Wilfred Tench, listened with genuine concern to my request for maximum protection for the new account. "Mr. Pemberton, we can set up two-factor authentication and alerts for any access attempts," he suggested. "I also recommend that you change any passwords associated with your finances." I nodded, inwardly amazed at how far I was willing to go to protect my money from my own son. But every time doubt began to gnaw at me, I remembered Delilah's words, "You're too poor to have a say," and determination returned. I spent the rest of the day getting my finances in order, canceled the automatic payments I'd been making to Nathan's account for years. I found out that I'd been quietly paying not only the mortgage, but also their home insurance, their annual pool maintenance, and their country club membership. I was amazed at how much money was flowing out each month to support their lavish lifestyle. By evening, I felt wrung out but strangely refreshed. I decided to celebrate my financial liberation with a simple but symbolic gesture. I ordered delivery from the best steakhouse in Bowers. 2 excellent steaks, one for me, the other shared by Aristo and Gertrude. They deserved a feast as much as I did. The next morning was clear and crisp. I woke up before my alarm clock, feeling a vigor I hadn't felt in years. I decided to mark the day with a special walk. Instead of our usual route through the neighborhood, The dogs and I went to Riverside Park, a vast expanse on the outskirts of Bowers with wooded trails and open lawns where the greyhounds had plenty of room to run around. As I watched Aristo and Gertrude strutting across the grass, I felt a rush of pure joy. They were beautiful in their swiftness and grace. Their joy in simply running, in the freedom of movement, was so genuine, so untainted. I thought I should follow their example of enjoying the moment without complicating it with unnecessary worries and regrets. "Good dogs," said an elderly man passing by. "Greyhounds?" "Yes," I answered proudly. "Russian hounds, aristocrats of the dog world." "And not cheap, I suppose," the stranger grinned. "Worth every penny," I replied. "They give more love and joy than most people." The man nodded understandingly and walked on, and I looked at my dogs and thought that maybe that's what wisdom is all about, putting your resources, time, and love into something that truly enriches your life. At home, I discovered 3 missed calls from Nathan. They started last night and continued this morning. I didn't bother to call back. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Instead, I decided to do something I'd been putting off for a while. I pulled boxes of old photos and letters out of the attic. I dismantled the bookshelves, setting aside some of the books to donate to the local library, fixed a creaky floorboard in the hallway, and replaced a burned-out light bulb in the basement. Each completed task was satisfying. I suddenly realized that I had been living in a state of limbo for the past few years, constantly putting off my own needs and desires for the sake of Nathan and his family. Now it was as if I was back to myself, taking charge of my own life. By noon, the calls from Nathan had increased in frequency. In between, calls from an unknown number, probably Delilah's. I muted the sound on my phone and continued my studies. After lunch came a text message. "Dad, we need to talk. It's urgent. It's about the house." I didn't respond. In the evening, the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw Nathan's car in the driveway. Well, that was to be expected. Taking a deep breath, I went to open the door. Nathan looked disheveled and worried. His usually immaculate clothes were wrinkled and his eyes were red from sleep. "Dad," he began without greeting, "what's going on? Why aren't you answering your cell phone?" "Come in." I stepped aside, letting him into the house. "Would you like some tea?" "Tea?" Nathan looked at me puzzled. "Dad, we have a problem. The bank sent a late notice on the mortgage. They say your payment hasn't been received." "I know," I said calmly. "I canceled it." Nathan stared at me as if I were speaking an alien language. "Canceled it? But why?" "Sit down," I pointed to a chair in the living room. "Let's talk like adults." Nathan lowered himself into the chair uncertainly, looking at me with a puzzled expression. Aristo and Gertrude, sensing the tension, came over to me and sat on either side of me like bodyguards. "Nathan," I began, "remember what we agreed to 5 years ago when I agreed to help with the mortgage?" "That you'd help us get back on our feet," he said, uncertainly. "And that this was a temporary measure," I added, "until you got a promotion and could keep up with the payments. You've gotten 2 promotions in the last 5 years. Your wife regularly buys designer clothes. You go on expensive vacations. And yet my help with the mortgage has not only not decreased, it has increased to include a host of additional expenses. How do you explain that?" Nathan lowered his eyes, avoiding my gaze. "Dad, you don't understand. We have a lot of expenses. The kids' schooling, social obligations, maintaining a certain lifestyle." "A lifestyle you can't afford," I finished for him. "And you've decided I'm going to subsidize it for the rest of my life." "No, you misunderstand." Nathan looked up at me pleadingly. "We appreciate your help. We really do. It's just not a good time to make a drastic change in our financial situation. I've got a new promotion coming up, a few more months." "You said the same thing a year ago," I interrupted him. "And 2 years ago." "Nathan, it's not about the money. It's not just about the money. It's about respect. "We respect you, Dad," he exclaimed. "How can you doubt it?" "You're too poor to have a say," I quoted his wife as saying. "I'll decide what to do because I'm the mistress of the house. Is that respect, do you think?" Nathan turned pale. "That's not what Delilah meant," he began. "She was just overreacting. You know how emotional she is." "No, Nathan," I shook my head. "Delilah said exactly what she meant. And you know what? She did me a favor. She opened my eyes to the truth." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at my small, manicured yard. Over the years, I had turned it into a cozy green space where my dogs loved to lounge. "All these years I thought I was helping my family," I continued, "that I was investing in my grandchildren's future, but in reality I was just paying for your whims and tolerating your neglect." "Dad, you're exaggerating," Nathan tried to object. "Yes, Delilah can be harsh sometimes, but she's a good mother and she cares about the family." "I'm sure she is," I nodded, "but I'm not part of that family. I'm an ATM, which from time to time I visit when I need money." "That's not fair," Nathan exclaimed, jumping up from his chair. "We're always inviting you to family events, calling you once a month, if not less," I finished for him. "And those invitations always come with some sort of conditions. Don't bring the dogs. Don't talk politics. Don't tell your old stories. I feel unwelcome in your home, Nathan, a house that I'm paying for in large part, by the way. If it's about money, we can talk about—" Nathan started, but I interrupted. Nathan began, but I interrupted him. "It's not about money. It's about how you feel about me. It's about how you see my opinions, my experience, my values as outdated and unnecessary. It's that you see me only as a source of money, not as a living person with feelings and dignity." Nathan was silent, digesting my words. His eyes flashed with either realization or calculation of how best to handle the situation. "Dad," he finally said, "I realize that Delilah and I have hurt you, and I'm truly sorry for that. But don't punish the kids for our mistakes. Without your help, we could lose the house. Think of the grandchildren. Where will they live?" It was a low blow to use the grandchildren as leverage, but I was ready for it. "In a house you can actually afford," I replied, "because Nathan, sooner or later you're going to have to learn to live within your means. I'm not forever, and you'd better learn it now while I'm still here and can give you advice than when I'm gone." "So you're not going to change your mind?" There was a note of desperation in Nathan's voice. "Are you really ready to let the bank take our house?" I sighed and sat down again in the chair opposite my son. "Nathan, listen to me carefully. I don't want you to lose the house, but I will no longer pay for a lifestyle you can't afford or tolerate disrespect from a man living on my money. You have options. You can sell the house and buy a more modest one. You can give up some of your optional expenses and use that money to pay off your mortgage. You can take an extra job or ask Delilah's parents for help, but my financial support is over." "And that's your last word?" Nathan asked quietly. "Yes," I answered firmly. "This is my last word." Nathan looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Maybe he did. Perhaps it was the first time he had seen me not as a compliant father who would do anything for his son, but as a man with his own will and dignity. "Well," he said, rising at last, "then we have nothing more to discuss." "It would seem so," I agreed. We walked in silence to the front door. At the door, Nathan stopped and turned around. "You know, Dad," he said bitterly, "I always thought you were the most trustworthy person in the world, someone who would never let us down, no matter what happened. And now you're willing to let us lose the house over one careless remark from Delilah." I looked my son straight in the eye. "And I always thought family was about mutual respect and support, not one-sided exploitation." Apparently we were both wrong. Nathan jerked as if he'd been hit, but he didn't say anything. He walked out and got into the car. I stood in the doorway watching him drive away and felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. It was as if I had dropped a heavy weight, but I had lost something important. Aristo and Gertrude approached me, silently offering their support. I leaned over and hugged them, feeling their warmth and love soothe the pain of this moment. "We'll make it, guys," I whispered, stroking their silky fur. "We'll live for ourselves now." That evening I sat on the back porch for a long time, watching the setting sun color the sky in shades of pink and gold. Aristo and Gertrude dozed at my feet, occasionally opening their eyes to make sure I was still around. I thought about how strangely life works. Sometimes you have to lose something to gain something more valuable. In my case, self-respect. The phone in the house kept ringing, but I paid no attention to it. That chapter of my life was closed. It was time to start a new one. The 3 days after Nathan's visit passed in blissful silence. I turned off the landline and put my cell phone on silent, occasionally checking for messages. There were a lot of them, angry tirades from Delilah, interspersed with Nathan's exhortations. I didn't respond. Instead, I savored the freedom. Long walks with Aristo and Gertrude around the Bowers neighborhood, reading books that had been set aside for a later date that was never coming, even started writing a memoir not for publication, but for myself. It was as if he was summarizing his life and at the same time opening a new chapter of it. On the 4th day, the silence was broken by the doorbell. I looked out the window and saw Delilah's white Mercedes in the driveway, an uninvited guest. My first impulse was to ignore the call, but then I decided it was time to set the record straight. I opened the door, holding the door for Aristo and Gertrude, who were staring warily at the visitor. Delilah looked different, not as immaculate as usual. Hair gathered into a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, clothes more practical than designer. She was clearly striving to give the impression of modesty and remorse. "Harrison," she began with a forced smile, "may I come in? We need to talk." I stepped back silently, letting her into the house. Delilah stepped hesitantly across the threshold, glancing warily at the dogs. "They don't bite," I said, "unless they sense falseness." Delilah grinned nervously, clearly not appreciating the joke. "Well, have a seat." I pointed to the chair in the living room, the same one Nathan had recently sat in. "Tea?" "No, thanks," she shook her head, sinking down on the edge of the chair. "I won't be long. I just wanted to clear the air." I sat down across from her, looking at her expectantly. Aristo and Gertrude lay at my feet, keeping their wary eyes on their guest. "Harrison," Delilah began after an awkward pause. I realized that what I said at the family council sounded unfortunate. I want to apologize for that. I was emotional and spoke out more harshly than I should have. I remained silent, waiting for it to continue. Delilah squirmed in her chair. "You know how much I care about the children's future," she continued. "Sometimes it makes me overreact, but I never meant to hurt you or diminish your contribution to our family." "And yet you said I was too poor to have a say," I reminded her, "and that you'd make up your own mind because you're the lady of the house. A house that I paid most of the mortgage on." Delilah had at least the conscience to look embarrassed. "I overreacted, Harrison. You know my temper, but it doesn't reflect how I really feel about you. Nathan and I really appreciate your support, and so do the kids. Penelope asks about you all the time." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "And a month ago, when I offered to take her to the dog show, you said she had an important piano lesson she couldn't miss." "It was a misunderstanding." Delilah looked away. "Look, Harrison, we all make mistakes. I admit I haven't always been fair to you. But is that really worth destroying everything we've built? Kids love their home, their school, their friends. You don't want them to suffer because of my stupid outburst, do you? More manipulation through the grandkids. I expected this." "The kids will adapt," I replied calmly. They might even benefit from learning that life has its challenges and that not everything is a snap of the fingers or a checkbook. Delilah straightened up sharply, showing her true face for a moment: evil, calculating. But she quickly returned the mask of remorse. Harrison, I understand your resentment, but think of Nathan. He's your only son. You don't want to ruin your relationship, do you? Our relationship wasn't ruined yesterday, I argued. It wasn't because of my decision to stop making payments. It had been ruined for years, every time Nathan let you treat me with disrespect, every time he forgot to call or canceled an appointment, every time he asked for money without wondering if I needed it. It's not fair, Delilah exclaimed, losing control. Nathan always respected you. He consulted with you on important matters. Like what? I interrupted. Name one important thing Nathan had asked my advice on in the last year. Delilah opened her mouth, but she couldn't say anything, because there hasn't been one. Exactly, I nodded. I was only needed as a source of funding. And you know what? I'm tired of that role. I deserve more than that. I deserve respect, attention, love. And if I can't get that from my family, at least I can live my life to my heart's content. And what does that mean? Delilah asked warily. It means I won't be paying for your lifestyle anymore, I answered. The money that used to go toward your mortgage will now be used to fulfill my own desires and plans. What plans? Delilah couldn't hide the disdain in her voice. What can you do at your age? I smiled, remembering an old dream. Like traveling, for example. Eleanor and I had always wanted to see the country but had put it off for later. First, there was work, then Nathan's education, then. There was always a reason to put it off. But now I have no reason to wait. Travel? Delilah looked like I'd announced my intention to go to the moon. At your age? With your illnesses? I have gout and high blood pressure, not terminal cancer, I said dryly. I'm perfectly capable of driving and enjoying new places, and Aristo and Gertrude will keep me company. You're going to drive around the country with dogs? Delilah didn't hide her skepticism. That's crazy. Maybe, I shrugged. But it's my crazy, and my money. Delilah looked at me as if I were mentally ill. Then her face took on a calculating expression. What about the grandchildren? She asked, trying to push the hurt. Will you just abandon them? They'll miss them. I'll call them on video calls, I replied. Send them postcards from different places. And when I get back, I'll be sure to spend time with them. Unless, of course, they have another emergency piano or Chinese class. The last words sounded harsher than I'd intended, but they hit the mark. Delilah pressed her lips together. So, this is your final decision. You're not going to renew the payments. I will not, I replied firmly. And I suggest you start looking for options to solve the problem. Sell the house before the bank starts foreclosure proceedings, or find other sources of income. We don't have any other sources, Delilah exclaimed, finally shedding her mask of remorse. You can't just— I can, I interrupted her, and I already have. This conversation is over, Delilah. I stood up, signaling that the audience was over. Delilah stood up too, glaring at me with a look of anger, confusion, and something akin to fear. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. When you're all alone, when your precious dogs are dead and your children and grandchildren are gone, you'll regret it. Maybe, I agreed. But you know what's worse than being alone? Being surrounded by people who only see you as a wallet. I've been there, and I don't want to be there anymore. Delilah turned and walked out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I heard her start the car and drive away, tires shrieking. Aristo came over and rested his muzzle on my knee, looking concerned. I stroked him, feeling my hands shaking. It's okay, boy, I told him. We're going to make it through this. Over the next 2 weeks, I busily engaged in preparations for the trip. I started with a visit to Dr. Burgess, who, to my surprise, supported my idea. Moderate exercise and new experiences can be very beneficial at your age, Mr. Pemberton, he said, prescribing my usual medications with a few months' supply. Just remember to take your medication regularly and keep an eye on your blood pressure. The next step was to buy a trailer. I settled on a compact model, spacious enough for me and the dogs, but not too cumbersome to drive. I spent a lot of time researching different options, consulting with salesmen and owners of similar motorhomes. Finally, I chose Wanderer, a small but comfortable trailer with solar panels on the roof, autonomous water supply system, and everything necessary for a comfortable life on the road. At the same time, I was deciding on a house. After some thought, I decided not to sell it, but to hire a reliable person to look after it. Mrs. Harris, a widow from the house next door, agreed to regularly check if everything was in order, pick up the mail, and watch the garden. Her presence should have deterred would-be burglars, and the security system installed for the occasion gave added peace of mind. In all this time, Nathan had called twice more. The first conversation was short and tense. He informed me that the bank had officially notified them that they had begun foreclosure proceedings on the house for non-payment. I expressed regret, but confirmed that I would not change my mind. The second call was more emotional. Nathan begged me not to break up the family, talking about how the kids were hysterical, that Delilah was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, that his career was in jeopardy because of financial problems. I listened in silence, and then I just said, "Nathan, you're adults. You can handle this. And my decision is unchangeable." I didn't get any more calls after that. I often thought about my grandchildren. I even tried to contact them directly. I called Oliver's cell phone, which I had given him for his last birthday. But the phone was disconnected. Delilah must have tried. It was frustrating, but it didn't make me question my decision. Sooner or later, the kids would grow up and be able to decide for themselves if they wanted to communicate with their grandfather. Finally, all the preparations were completed. The trailer, docked to my old but reliable Ford, stood ready for the trip. Inside was everything I needed: a supply of food and medicine, clothes in season, dog food, a few favorite books, and a framed picture of Eleanor, the only piece of jewelry I had decided to take with me. On the eve of my departure, I took one last walk around Bowers. I stopped at Wesley Crump's bakery, where I bought not one, but 3 cinnamon buns, one for myself and half each for the dogs. A special occasion called for a special treat. "So you're leaving, Mr. Pemberton?" Wesley asked, wrapping up the buns. "For how long?" "As long as it takes," I answered. "Maybe a month, maybe a year. It depends." "Well, have a safe trip." Wesley handed me the bag. "And you know what? These buns are on the house, as a parting gift." I was touched by this simple gesture of kindness from a man I barely knew. Early the next morning, I loaded Aristo and Gertrude into the car, checked the house and trailer one last time, and hit the road. It was a little scary, I'll admit. At 75, starting a new life, setting out into the unknown takes a certain amount of courage, or desperation, or both. I chose the coast as my first stop. I wanted to see the ocean I hadn't seen in years. The drive took 3 days, with overnight stops at cozy campgrounds where Aristo and Gertrude could run around after a long time in the car. And then, finally, we made it. I parked the trailer on the observation deck above the beach and got out, breathing in the salty sea air. The dogs jumped out next, sniffing curiously at the new smells. It was the end of the day, and the sun was slipping toward the horizon, coloring the sky and water in shades of gold and purple. We walked down to the beach, me slowly, leaning on my cane, the dogs impatiently circling around me. The sand was cool and damp under my feet. The waves rolled in measuredly, leaving a lacy foam on the shore. I sat down on the folding chair I'd brought with me, and Aristo and Gertrude sat beside me, looking at the water with the same fascination as me. At that moment, My cell phone rang. I pulled it out of my pocket. Nathan. After hesitating for a second, I muted it and put the phone back away. Whatever he had to say could wait. Now was a moment just for me and my faithful companions. The sun was slowly sinking into the ocean, painting a golden path on the water. A light breeze ruffled my gray hair and the silky fur of the greyhounds. In the distance, seagulls shouted, and the waves continued their eternal conversation with the shore. I looked at this splendor and felt an amazing calmness inside. For the first time in many years, I was absolutely free from obligations, from the expectations of others, from the role that had been imposed on me and that I had been playing for too long, free to choose my path, my life, my happiness. "See, Ellie?" I whispered to my wife, as if she could hear me through time and space. "I made it to the ocean after all. I wish you were here, but I hope you'd approve." Aristo laid his head on my knee, looking up with his intelligent eyes. I petted him, feeling a lump in my throat. "It's okay, boy," I told him. "Everything is going to be okay now." And in that moment, looking out at the sunset over the vast ocean with the dogs at my feet and the whole world ahead of me, I knew I was telling the truth.